to give evidence before us. We believe, given the serious nature of the allegations that have been made around the access and use of Facebook user data, that it is appropriate that Mark Zuckerberg should give evidence to the committee. He has suggested that Chris Cox, the Chief Product Officer at Facebook, could come to London to give evidence to the committee in the first week after the Easter recess. So we'll be very happy to invite Mr. Cox to give evidence. However, we would still like to hear from Mr. Zuckerberg as well. We will seek to clarify with Facebook whether he is available to give evidence or not, because that wasn't clear from our correspondence. And if he is available to give evidence, then we will be happy to do that either in person or by video link, if that would be more convenient for him. If there are any, happy to answer any further questions about that after the hearing, but that is all we'd like to say on that at this time. We turn now to the evidence session this morning. If I could ask Chris Wiley first. As you know, a lot of the committee's work over the last few weeks has been looking at the role of Cambridge Analytica in the data analytics business and their campaigns, and we heard evidence from Alexander Nix a few weeks ago. Perhaps you could, for the benefit of the committee and the record, just explain how you first became involved with Alexander Nix and Cambridge Analytica.
Sure. So I first joined SCL Group, which is the parent company of Cambridge Analytica, actually before Cambridge Analytica existed in June 2013. I got introduced to him through a mutual contact that I had worked with previously in UK politics. The firm SCL had an opening for a research director, in part because the past research director died in his hotel room in Kenya when he was working for Uhuru Kenyatta. I didn't know that at the time. Part of the reason why I got chosen to become research director is because the firm was looking to expand its digital capacity and sort of keep up with developments that were happening, particularly on the military side, looking at how information spreads online and developing new IP that they could then pass on to clients, whether that's political or military. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And can you explain how long you worked at and with Cambridge Analytica and what caused you to leave the company?
Sure. So when I started in June 2013, Cambridge Analytica didn't exist yet. So and it's important for people to understand that Cambridge Analytica is more of a concept or a brand than anything else, because it doesn't actually have employees. It's all SCL. It's just the front-facing company for the United States. But I started at SCL Group in June 2013. In July 2014, that's when I told Alexander Nix that I didn't want to continue working at the time Cambridge Analytica, although I scaled down my work until the 2014 midterms. So a year and a half. Cambridge Analytica, just to be clear, was set up in large part because of the research that I was doing at SCL Group. So it was the IP that we were creating was acquired by Robert Mercer, and Cambridge Analytica became the vehicle to sort of acquire that IP.
Yeah. How would you said that SCL.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would you characterize the relationship between these different companies? I mean, is it in effect one organization that exists behind different facades?
Yeah, I mean, so Cambridge Analytica was set up in part because, first of all, there was So the way it works is CA was set up, and SCL Elections, which is part of SCL Group, which is a group company. SCL Elections became a minority shareholder, and then Robert Mercer became the majority shareholder of Cambridge Analytica. SCL then assigned its intellectual property to Cambridge Analytica, and then Cambridge Analytica licensed back the IP to SCL Elections, and then also granted SCL Elections an exclusivity contract whereby all projects from Cambridge Analytica would be given to SCL to work on, although the actual contracting on the client-facing side would be with Cambridge Analytica. Partly that was because in the United States there's particular rules against foreign actors in elections, so having an American company was beneficial for that purpose. Also, Robert Mercer's lawyers were concerned about two things. Firstly, the optics of acquiring a UK military contractor to work in American elections. Optically, that wouldn't necessarily play well. And secondly, they were concerned about of the shareholders in the company, as well as some of the past projects they had worked on.
The company being SCL? No,
SCL,
yeah. So Cambridge Analytica was a kind of a company set up with the purpose of doing political work in America? In
the United States, with a new brand that was sort of untainted by any history or legacy of past projects or shareholders.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people will say, and are saying, that given you're someone who worked very closely with these people for a period of time and understand this world very well and have built your career working in it, why have you decided to speak out against it and give evidence against people who used to be your colleagues?
Because, as a citizen, one is expected and has a duty to report unlawful activity. If you're asking about sort of my journey to this moment, a lot of people have asked me, why is it taking you so long? What they don't see is that actually I've been working on this with The Guardian and then later the New York Times and Channel 4 for a year. So what you're seeing is sort of the apex or the climax of that. But this is a year-long coming out process. But before going public, I went and started working with the ICO and UK authorities to start their investigation. Also, after I left Cambridge Analytica, very shortly after that, I got threatened with legal action and had a very aggressive team of lawyers coming after me. So I signed an undertaking of confidentiality, which would mean that if I did break that, I could be sued into oblivion by Robert Mercer. So frankly, that's intimidating. But more broadly, it was only until 2016 when I was working at CA and setting it up. You don't appreciate the future impact of what your work is until it starts to happen. And so 2016 was, where I started looking at what this company was actually doing in the United States, and, coming to appreciate that the projects that I was working on may have had a much wider impact than I initially anticipated it would. And after Donald Trump got inaugurated, very shortly after that, that's when I started working with Carol at The Guardian on reporting some of the things that the company was doing. So for the spring, I was one of her key sources anonymously until we could figure out a legal position that would then allow me to come forward.
So you, it'd be fair to say that for you, Donald Trump's election sort of crossed a line. You felt that techniques that you were aware of had been used, shouldn't have been used in the way they were used during the campaign, and therefore you felt that you had to speak out about it. Would that be a way of characterizing it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's just because of Donald Trump, but Donald Trump kind of makes it click in your head that this actually has a much wider impact. I don't think that military-style information operations is conducive for any democratic process, whether it's a US presidential or a local council race.
Yeah. Could I ask as well about the relation when Cambridge Analytica was founded? I mean, who do you think sort of, in terms of how the algorithm, the database that Cambridge Analytica worked from, was that something it inherited from SCL, or was that something that you developed, or was it developed by other people?
No, SCL. This is partly why I was brought on as research director, because SCL was falling behind in its technical capacity and its quantitative skill set. So it didn't, SCL before I joined did not have any data assets. So that was in large part why I got hired. So it was the Ripon project that actually scaled, acquired, data and scaled it. It was at that moment where they started becoming more focused on data science and machine learning.
Because is it true? I've seen reported that the idea.
Because it's sort of a bizarre story. So Alexander Nix has his sort of standard pitch, as it were, and it often relies heavily on, we have offices in Mayfair, and I went to Eton, and, presenting a very sort of posh veneer onto the company, which, when you look at their clientele in a lot of the, and there's still sort of that sort of image, plays well with certain types of clients that he had worked with in the past. Problem was that for Steve Bannon, he didn't really care about that. He was much more interested in, going and speaking at student events at Cambridge than, sitting in a posh office in Mayfair. So Alexander realized that, and he decided to set up a fake office in Cambridge, so that whenever Steve Bannon, this is before Steve Bannon came on board to which set up a project which eventually became CA, and so whenever Bannon would come, we set up this fake office, and to sort of present a more academic side of the company. And it was from that Steve Bannon decided we should call it Cambridge Analytica because of how closely associated it was with the university. Because in his head, it was a very academic company. Okay.
And other than that geographical proximity, did the company have any particular relationship with Cambridge University?
It didn't have a formal relationship, but we did work with a lot of professors at the University of Cambridge, in particular the psychology department and the psychometric center.
Okay, so they would do research projects and assist with developing techniques and feeding ideas.
Yeah. We would use the Cambridge has an amazing psychology department. It's one of the top, if not the top, in the world for psychology. So. It was a real resource to have that very close to us. So we did work with several professors at the psychology department on developing psychometric inventories, and also looking more broadly at the research that was coming out of the university in psychological profiling using online data exhaust. So, a lot of the papers that eventually became the foundation of the methods that were then used on the Ripon project, that all came out of research that was being done at the University of Cambridge, some of which was funded in part by DARPA, for example, which is the US military's research agency.
And did you just approach academics on an ad hoc basis, or was there any engagement with the university authorities or any of the departments?
We definitely talked to some of the more senior professors, but it was all, there was nothing formalized with the university itself. Mm-hmm. So it was all done, professor to professor to professor, but it sort of sat in a gray area. I mean, when Ripon was happening, we had a lot of people who we were engaging at Cambridge who provided, who played a pivotal role in actually getting that project going.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Paul Farrelly.
Thank you, Chair. So essentially your central motivation has been to rather aghast that techniques in the social media world that have been used for military psyops purposes are being used in the political domain.
I mean, that's a part of it. I think also more broadly, when you look at how Cambridge Analytica operates or how SCL operates, they don't care whether or not what they do is legal as long as it gets the job done. So it's not. There's been a lot of focus on the data side of things, and there's been a lot of focus on targeting. But more broadly, this is a company that goes around the world and undermines civic institutions of countries that are struggling to develop those institutions. So there's a lot of reasons why I find the company problematic. It's not just the data. It's also more broadly that they are an example of what modern day colonialism looks like. You have a wealthy company from a developed nation going into an economy or a democracy that's still struggling to get its feet on the ground, and taking advantage of that to profit from that. So there's several reasons why I find the company problematic.
So do they sort of like to have an aura, do you think, of being the smash of the modern digital age?
The smash?
Smash. So James Bond, the evil organisation that manipulates things here, there, and everywhere across the world.
I think if you watch the Channel 4 Undercover, for example, I think you can see for yourself that they know that that's the brand that they present, and they cultivate that. I think they find it amusing.
No, I sort of get it, and I didn't quite know what to make of Mr. Nix when he came to us, apart from that he was a corporate financier who sought a sort of a high calling, as he almost said it to us. But I do remember on the Channel 4, one of the most hilarious bits was a chap called Mark Turnbull, who got a big plaster on his nose, I think, saying that he was a master of disguise.
He doesn't always have the plaster on his nose.
Okay. There's just before we want to get onto some of the things that happen in different parts of the world, but just before we do, I just wanted to just probe into your predecessor who died in Kenya.
Yeah.
Was that? I've not heard of that. Working for the Kenyatta campaign.
Yeah.
Were there any suspicious circumstances?
I've heard several different stories as to what actually happened, so I don't know which story is accurate, but it didn't sound. When you work in Kenyan politics or politics in a lot of African countries, if a deal goes wrong, you can pay for it.
So is this a matter of public record, or is this new now?
Dan, who's my predecessor, his death did cause some news coverage in Romania because he was the son of a cabinet minister in Romania who is now in jail for corruption charges, I think. But so he came from a political family in Romania. So the fact that he died was news, but the circumstances of his death, I've heard different stories, so I'm not sure which is.
And his name was Dan?
Dan, his surname starts with an M. And
Muresan.
Yeah,
Muresan.
Could you spell that just for the record?
Muresan.
Okay.
He was working simultaneously in India, and there is also some coverage
simultaneously
from there.
in India?
Yes.
I mean, this when you look at Facebook's biggest market, I mentioned this in the States as well. You know, India is the top in terms of numbers of users, and obviously that's a country where, you know, which is rife with political discord and opportunities for destabilization. So that
they've worked extensively in India. They have an office in India.
I think that's something we might want to pursue later. But just on this point, when you were told that there was a vacancy because your predecessor died in Kenya, what explanation did the company give to you of that death?
Just to clarify, when I got hired, I wasn't told that my predecessor died in Kenya in his hotel room. That was several months after, when I asked about who was I actually replacing. Because I was looking for some old files and I couldn't find. So I did realize that I didn't actually know the name of the person who I replaced. So I asked about, you know, looking through old files, and that's where it came out that he died.
So same question 2 months on then. What explanation were you given of the? How old was he? Do you know?
He was in his 30s.
Did they give you information?
I mean, they did. Just if I explain it, just if you understand that it's pure speculation. So
Sure.
It's not. I'm not stating this as a matter of fact. I'm just repeating, you know, what I heard. What I heard was that he was working on some kind of deal of some sort. I'm not sure exactly what kind of deal it is, but when you work for senior politicians in a lot of these countries, you don't actually make money in the electoral work. You make money in the influence brokering, you know, after the fact. And that a deal went sour, and again, this is what I've been told, so I'm not saying this as a matter of fact, but people suspected that he was poisoned in his hotel room. I also heard that the police got bribed to not enter the hotel room for 24 hours. But that is what I was told. I wasn't there, so I can't, you know, speak to the veracity of that account. But that's what I was told. Okay, well,
we'll leave that there for the moment because there are plenty of journalists who might want to follow some of those interesting leads. One of the things that as Mr. Nix was at pains to when he was in front of us was that, you know, there were different companies, different entities. Data could go one way but not another way because of government contracting. But there was like one name that came up as the data control that was common between Cambridge Analytica and SCL, just almost demonstrating that, you know, there were common personnel, notwithstanding the denials. Was a lady called Jordana Zeta. Do you know her?
I do not.
No. So it's just a name.
It's just a name, but they do put lots of random names on all kinds of things.
Okay. I mean, there's also we've just been. I don't know whether you've seen that, which is a pictogram of the SCL structure. It's
sure.
Been done by an independent journalist, and it's just from filings at Companies House and
sure.
So it's fairly standard, but it's fairly complicated for a relatively
I'd
small
wager
company.
that there's probably more companies than even what's on that piece of paper.
But there are some interesting sort of names that crop up. Mr. Nix we know about. Sort of Etonian salesman, I think you almost described him as.
I mean, he my understanding is that the reason why Alexander Nix was involved in SCL was because his father had shares in the company and his father died. He inherited shares, or there was some deal that was done, because he has no background in psychology, tech, you know, politics, any of the things that they operate in, which is why he's a salesman. He likes to sell stuff.
And while I was cooking Sunday lunch this weekend, I listened to a BBC profile of Nigel Oakes.
Right.
Did you come across him?
Yes, although not day to day. So when we were setting up Cambridge Analytica, the reason why one of the reasons why SCL Elections, rather than either the group company or another entity, was the minority shareholder, was because Alexander Nix wanted to keep more control for himself, and he was quite paranoid about some of the other shareholders and directors in the group company. So he made a concerted effort to sort of keep this project away from the others as long as possible. But I did come across him several times. It's just what I'm saying is that it wasn't day to day. I didn't work with
Nigel X. Mr. X came across as a founding eminence grise.
Sorry?
From this profile, eminence grise behind the whole of the whole project.
No, not for Cambridge Analytica. For SCL, yes, but not for Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica was Steve Bannon, Robert Mercer, and Alexander Nix. You know, most of those negotiations happened in America. They kept it pretty separate from the sort of legacy shareholders and directors of SCL. Okay. But he played a pivotal role in actually setting up SCL Group. Can I just throw
the role of a couple of other people? The role of the chairman, Julian Wheatland, who and Victor Cengiz,
which they got rid of Cengiz when they were finalizing the Cambridge Analytica deal, because the Mercer lawyers didn't like Cengiz's involvement, because apparently he had fairly sketchy business dealings that they didn't want to be associated with.
Okay, and Julian Wheatland, what was his role?
He was, I believe, the chairman, so he didn't sort of do much. He sort of was like the queen of the company, if that makes sense.
So you
not to say that the queen doesn't do a lot. I don't interpret that as a slight of it.
Yeah. Mean head.
I'm just putting these other names up, and because there's a danger that one focuses just on Mr. Nix's surname.
Yeah. So a lot of these guys, their role is not actually to do work; it's to do deals. Right? So they don't actually do anything day to day. They're the ones who, you know, because of their family or because of their businesses or what have you, just have a very wide network of people, not just here in the UK, but in particular in Africa and various developing countries that, you know, enable the company to go and get working contracts. So their roles were usually like as the introducer, as the deal maker, not managing the day-to-day operations of the company.
Would you characterize them as people who wanted to make a fortune out of this, or people who were genuinely curious about the ability through social media in the digital age for them to be able to manipulate outcomes in politics?
You have to remember that a lot of these people are very wealthy already, so it's not, you know, Alexander Nix in particular, right? There was one time where he had to go, and we were running late because he had to pick up a 200,000 pound chandelier. So he you know, these are people who don't need to make a lot of money, but the thing that I learned is that for certain wealthy people, they need something to keep them occupied, and they need projects. And going into the developing world and sort of running a country is something that appeals to them.
Okay, and I've just got one last question, really.
Sorry, I didn't mean that in a flippant way, if that came across as flippant. Sorry.
This chart has got no mention of aggregate IQ or SCL Canada as it styled itself. So what's the relationship between that Canadian company and the rest of this group?
Yeah, so very shortly after I became research director at SCL, and I was sort of given the directive or the mandate to expand the company's software capacity and technological infrastructure. We obviously needed people to do that. So I reached out to people who had worked on previous projects with, who I respected. One of those people was Jeff Sylvester, who is now the CTO of Aggregate IQ. So in the first email that I sent, which I've also passed on to the committee, I've passed on several folders of documents. You know, the first email where I tell Jeff that I've just become research director, this is what we do, his immediate reaction is, you need a Canadian office. So he replied, you need a Canadian office. When I went to Alexander Nix and I said, there's a couple Canadians that I want to hire, he said, fine, but they have to come here and work in London. So when I talked with Jeff and several other people who then later became AIQ, they had new families, just got a house. It's not easy to just get up and move to a different country when you have young kids, right? So I went back to Alexander and said, look, they're not mobile, but I think they'd be really helpful because they're really good at what they do. So the compromise was that a Canadian company would be set up that would enable the Canadians who wanted to work on the projects. And keep in mind, at the time, this is SCL. This is before Cambridge Analytica got set up. So primarily, we were focused on projects in the developing world. But the deal was that they would sign an intellectual property license whereby all of the work that they were doing for the company would then be assigned to SCL Group, and that they would trade as SCL Canada, but they set up a Canadian entity, and that the legal name was Aggregate IQ. That was also in part because, when you work in a lot of countries, sometimes it's beneficial to have different billing names on invoices, and if you're working in a country that has declarable expenses and all of that,
True.
you can particularly if you're trying to get around coordination rules, like in the United States, which have very strict non-coordination rules. If you can actually bill as several different companies, but it's the same team working on it, the paperwork looks compliant, even if the project isn't.
So it's a Canadian-based shell company, effectively.
Yeah, I would sort of call it like a franchise, as it were. So in internal staff documents, so for example, this internal staff list, which I've also passed on to the committee, AIQ staff are listed under SCL Canada. So the internal documents of the company refer to this entity, AIQ, as SCL Canada. As I've been saying for months now, but as has now been validated yesterday by Gizmodo, which is a website that has actually found the code base that AIQ built that shows that AIQ actually built the Ripon platform for Cambridge Analytica. So there's now tangible proof in the public domain that AIQ actually built Ripon, which is the software that utilized the algorithms from the Facebook data. I could talk more about some of the other projects that AIQ has worked on. So for example, Nigeria, the Nigerian project in 2015, that Carol at The Guardian has touched on in her reporting, where the company utilized the services of an Israeli private intelligence firm. That firm is Black Cube. That's not being reported, although Channel 4 has undercover footage that they haven't been able to put into the public domain of Alexander Nix talking about the relationship with Black Cube. Black Cube on the Nigeria project was engaged to hack the now president of Nigeria, Buhari, to get access to his medical records and private emails. AIQ worked on that project. So Aggregate IQ was handed material in Nigeria from Cambridge Analytica to distribute online. So that's distribution of compromat, and that's also distribution of incredibly threatening and violent video content, which I've also passed on to the committee. The videos that AIQ distributed in Nigeria with the sole intent of intimidating voters included content where people were being dismembered, where people were having their throats cut and bled to death in a ditch. They were being burned alive. There's incredibly anti-Islamic and threatening messages portraying Muslims as violent, and this is, again, so you've got Aggregate IQ, which received 40% of Vote Leave's funding, also working on projects that involved hacked material and compromat and distributing violent videos of people being bled to death to intimidate voters. And this is the company that played an incredibly pivotal role in politics here. So something that I would strongly recommend to the committee is that they actually, not only push the authorities here, but really give them, the support that they need in order to actually investigate this company and what they were doing in Brexit.
I've just got one final question because my colleague Julie Elliott wants to come in. Most of the reporting on the Cambridge Analytica link or lack of link with leave.eu, rather than its entities links with Vote Leave, both from the Vote Leave campaign and also the money that's been diverted off to Believe. The other focus of reporting has been the number of the amount of Facebook data that's been collected through Alexander Kogan's activities, which mostly seems to be related to the States. But clearly the question underlying all this is if you're going to spend such a lot of money trying to influence the UK referendum, then to be able to try and do that, you have to have a set of data on lots of UK individuals to make it worth people's while spending the money with you. So I hope that is the extent of the UK data that's held by Cambridge Analytica and its affiliates and associates might come out in this session.
One of the things that I've also passed on to the committee is some of the contractual documentation and emails from some of AIQ's past projects. One of them was for the at the time the Minister of National Security of Trinidad. In the contractual documents and then also email chains, AIQ, part of the project was to go out and find a way of accessing raw internet service provider data for the entire country to monitor what people were browsing in that country. As I understand it, that's not legal in Trinidad. It certainly wouldn't be legal here. But the thing that I would say is that Aggregate IQ, in part because it was set up and works within the auspices of Cambridge Analytica, inherited a lot of the company culture of total disregard for the law. And so I would, again, strongly encourage actually looking at, this question of where did they get the data? When I met with Dom Cummings in November 2015, one of the things that was apparent is that Vote Leave at the time actually didn't have any data. So to go and that's in November 2015. So, and Dom Cummings, in part, wanted to meet with me because he was really interested in Cambridge Analytica. He also said that he wanted to create the quote-unquote Palantir for politics. And, but it became apparent that it's like, well, if you don't even have the electoral register, let alone, a social database, you can't really do this, or you can't really do this legally. Very shortly after that meeting, they then engage AIQ. I think in part, although this bit is me speculating, I think in part because they couldn't, it would look odd if Leave EU was working with Cambridge Analytica and Vote Leave was working with Cambridge Analytica, but you could get the next best thing, which is a company that can do virtually everything that CA can do, but with a different, billing name for your invoices. But my question is, where did you get the data? Because how do you create a massive targeting operation in a country that AIQ hadn't previously worked in, in 2 months. It baffles me as to how that could happen in such a short amount of time. So that's a good question. It's unfortunate that AIQ hides behind jurisdictional barriers and doesn't actually come here and answer those questions. But it is something that hopefully can be looked at. So how did it actually work? You know, this is a company that has worked with hacked material, right? This is a company that will send out videos of people being murdered to intimidate voters. This is a company that goes out and tries to illicitly acquire, you know, live internet browsing data of everyone in an entire country. So I think a lot of questions should be asked about the role of aggregate IQ in this election and whether they were indeed actually compliant with the law here, beyond just suspending infractions.
Thank you. I understand that quite a few colleagues want to come in on this particular the proceedings. Chris Wiley's given the committee access to a large number of documents that he has. We received those this morning, and we will be looking to go through those and discuss those with him, with a view to publishing some of those documents probably tomorrow, but certainly as soon as we can practically go through them and look through them. Can I just ask, the allegation you make about AIQ and Nigeria are very serious. The documents and the folders you've given us, they provide evidence to support that allegation.
So you have the video, one of the videos that I'm referring to, and I'd recommend following Carol's reporting on the matter, because she's done a ton of work on researching it, and she's actually published some articles on the Nigeria hacking scheme also. But AIQ was involved in the Nigeria project. Both as the company and then several people also individually who also frequently work at AIQ.
Yeah, thank you. So, Julian, Ian. Okay.
Can I just ask a very short question? Mr. Wiley, a statement that was made by Aggregate IQ on their website on Saturday the 24th of March 2018.
Sure.
They said, Aggregate IQ is a digital advertising, web and software development company based in Canada. It is and has always been 100% Canadian owned and operated. Aggregate IQ has never been and is not a part of Cambridge Analytica or SCL. What is your reaction to that statement?
They're using weasel words. So that is all technically true.
Yeah.
Okay, but let me be super clear. Okay, so they are based in Canada. That is true. They are a Canadian company. That is true. They are not owned, but they have licensed their intellectual property, right? Secondly, the basis of the software of Cambridge Analytica, right? So for example, the Ripon project, they built that. They operate as an internal entity. They're kept at an arm's length in part because that was useful for particularly American projects where you need different entities to work on campaigns and PACs and various other entities where you can't necessarily coordinate. But if you have different companies, you know, you can, the paperwork looks appropriate and the paperwork looks compliant even if, you know, behind the scenes you're talking back and forth and using the same underlying technology. They built Ripon. Ripon was the software that these algorithms went into that then deployed the data to target. The actual sort of advertising deployment was on them. That's what they did. So it's fine and dandy for them to say, you know, we're a Canadian company. That's true. But if you sort of, you know, unmask what they actually do and look at how they actually operate and the projects that they've actually worked on, you know, the overwhelming majority of those projects and the overwhelming majority of their income comes from and came from Cambridge Analytica and SCL.
Are you in a position to say definitively today that Cambridge Analytica shared its data with AIQ?
It depends on what you mean by its data. So
shared any data?
Yes, absolutely. You can't create software that deploys adverts or targets people online, or has a front-end interface for you to query data without actually accessing the data itself, right? You can't have targeting software that doesn't access the database, right? So CA would have the database, Cambridge AIQ would be able to access that because otherwise the software doesn't work. If you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. We have evidence now that Facebook data, Cambridge Analytica, and I think it's accepted even by Facebook that information was unlawfully transferred to Cambridge Analytica. Can you say that AIQ had access to that data?
Yes, because that's what the Ripon software and the Ripon project was. The modeling of that Facebook data amongst other data sets, and then the deployment of that data in online targeting and various other political projects, and it was Aggregate IQ that actually built the software for that. And so I provided documents in terms of the what I provided to the committee is the contractual documents for that and the IP licensing for that. But yesterday, the website Gizmodo actually has found a lot of the actual underlying code with the software development comments, between AIQ and SCL developers. So not only do you have access to the contractual documents, which I provided to the committee, but also, if you look at what Gizmodo is reporting, you can actually see the code.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I think, if you don't mind, I think Rebecca's got one quick question on this point, if you don't mind, then we'll come on.
What I was actually going to ask it. I was so interested in you saying earlier, where did they get the data from? And I just wanted to get this sort of on the record, because we had Alexander Nix here, and I asked him about whether they'd used Facebook data, and he categorically said, we don't work with Facebook, we do not have Facebook data, but we do use it as a platform to advertise, we do gather data from Facebook, and we do surveys. So
we don't have Facebook data, but we gather Facebook data.
So what would you say to that? Do you, just on the record, do you think that was just absolutely a lie, that in fact they did have Facebook data, they were gathering it, they were using it? And on the back of that, if we have this link between Cambridge Analytica and Aggregate IQ, of which Robert Mercer owns the company, surely they must be using the data.
So, to address your first point, it is categorically untrue that Cambridge Analytica has never used Facebook data. Facebook data and the acquisition using Alexander Kogan's app was the foundational data set of the company. That is how the algorithms were developed. They spent $1 million at least on that acquisition project. And so for him, and by the way, what I've provided to the committee is the signed contracts, okay, with Alexander Kogan's signature and Alexander Nix's signature on a contract that references using an app that harvests Facebook data and the friend network data also.
So they've led us up the garden path for a long time, and now we're getting to the bottom of it.
I think Alexander Nix's comments to your committee were exceptionally misleading. And frankly, I would say not only misleading, but I think they were dishonest.
Thank you.
Julie
Elliott.
Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry, if I may. There's also been on YouTube, on the public record in a way, for a long time, 2 videos from 2015 where you see interns, at least one of the videos, you see an intern that was working at Cambridge Analytica that was describing his work in a public forum. His work using Facebook likes to model psychographics, and he's describing his work at Cambridge Analytica. When the Guardian contacted Cambridge Analytica, the video was removed, even though it was controlled by a different entity called ASI Data Science. So I had managed to download that video, so I have it, and I put it on the record.
And by the way, ASI Data Science also worked for Vote Leave. And ASI was one of the subcontractors to Cambridge Analytica, and they provided a lot of the data scientists that Cambridge Analytica used to do their modeling work. So Vote Leave used aggregate IQ. They also used ASI. Their chief technology officer, Tom Borick, also worked on projects for SCL Group in Trinidad and Antigua. So I think, more broadly, a question should be asked is like, why is it that all these entities were being used? Given that Dom Cummings was very interested in Cambridge Analytica, and not only Cambridge Analytica, but more broadly, Robert Mercer's work in Renaissance Technologies, which is his hedge fund. What did Dom Cummings know, and why is it that he was using aggregate IQ and ASI data science? Why is it that their CTO was also somebody who ran projects for SCL Group around the world? I mean, these are, and to her credit, Carol at The Guardian has been raising these questions for a year now. So I think it would be appropriate for your committee and other committees to start raising those questions also. What was happening inside of Vote Leave, and why were these companies chosen?
Thank you. Julie Elliott.
Thank you. This is fascinating, and quite a lot of things that I've asked have come out, was wanting to ask, have come out in evidence, but it sounds to me as if all of these different names of things are to just try and confuse what on earth's going on here. Not by you, but by the companies, the way they've been set up. If AIQ, they were being paid for work for the Vote Leave campaign and others, do you think they were working to a common plan for paid work to get a common result? Or do you think they were all working separately?
I know that, well, sorry, before I answer, are you referring to, which common plan are you referring to before I answer?
For the various leave campaigns, right, which was to get a leave result in the referendum. So so let me first say, it's just, I supported leave. Despite having pink hair and a nose ring, I'm one of the rare breeds of progressive Eurosceptics. I don't believe in the current Brexit plan, so just to clarify, but I do speak as somebody who, for me this is not about remain or leave, this is about the integrity of the democratic process, which is more important than anything else. Okay, so I just want to preface what I say. I am absolutely convinced that there was a common plan and common purpose with Vote Leave, Be Leave, the DUP, and Veterans for Britain. All of these companies somehow, for some reason, all decided to use aggregate IQ as their primary service provider when aggregate IQ did not have any public presence, no media, no website. The only way that you could find them on the internet is if you went to SCL's website and called up SCL Canada, right? So first question that I have is, why is it that all of a sudden this company that has never worked on anything but Cambridge Analytica projects, that had no public presence, somehow became the primary service provider to all of these supposedly independent and different campaign groups, firstly. And secondly, what I've provided to the Electoral Commission is 3 binders of evidence, about this high, of emails, documents, invoices, chat logs, activity logs, system logs, screen caps of conversations that were happening inside of Vote Leave, in particular with reference to the Be Leave project, which was the single largest expenditure of Vote Leave, went to Be Leave. And when you look at the accumulation of evidence, I think it would be completely unreasonable to come to any other conclusion that this must be coordination, this must be a common purpose plan. When I went to Aggregate IQ's office, because I was, after BuzzFeed released their first article on isn't it bizarre that a fashion student who was 22 received, £625,000 in the last like 2 weeks of the referendum. And isn't it weird that this Canadian company that no one's ever heard of received 40% of Leave spending? And having introduced Darren and Shamir to Vote Leave and having set up this company, I was genuinely concerned that, you know, that something unlawful happened. I mean, it doesn't pass the smell test. And when I went and actually spoke to Aggregate IQ, who were very, very pleased with themselves as how that project went, you know, understandably they won. But, you know, I asked them, I said, well, can you show me actually what it is that you were doing? What was your secret? How did you, you know, and he's, you know, how did you win? What did you do? And they conceded to me, and this is a verbatim quote, which I, you know, and I stand by, you know, I remember Jeff Sylvester telling me this. It was, quote, totally illegal. But they found it amusing because you have to remember that this is a company that has gone around the world and undermined democratic institutions in all kinds of countries, right? They could care less as to whether or not their work is compliant because they like to win. And when I asked them, okay, show me some of the work that you've done, I asked them, you know, did you silo the data? Did you silo your advertising? You know, if you're doing programmatic advertising, if you don't silo your programs into different campaigns, the results of one campaign will influence the results of the other campaign. And they said, absolutely not. It was all just one common ad program, which means that Aggregate IQ was just used as a proxy money laundering vehicle, right? It was all what Dom Cummings did is he went around and found places that he could just launder money through to give it to AIQ so that they could overspend. And that is my genuinely held belief. And for me, it makes me so angry because a lot of people supported Leave because they believe in, you know, the application of British law and British sovereignty, and to irrevocably alter the constitutional settlement of this country on fraud is a mutilation of the constitutional settlement of this country. And you cannot call yourself a Leaver, you cannot call yourself somebody who believes in British law and win by breaking British law in order to achieve that goal.
And is that your belief as well, that the law was broken in this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I am so angry that, you know, that two people that I introduced in good faith that, you know, it's hard for a lot of young people to get involved in politics. And I introduced these two young people to volunteer on a campaign to Stephen Parkinson in good faith that, you know, that they wouldn't be manipulated and they wouldn't be used to break the law. And what is so egregious about this is that Darren was made to be personally liable for a criminal conspiracy, in my view. And it is absolutely outrageous that he has the amount of emotional trauma that Darren has been put through. You know, watching his mental health deteriorate, watching. You know that Dom Cummings and Matthew Elliott encouraged him and eventually convinced him to quit university so that he could stay at Brexit Central, right? And when I talked to Darren and I said, you know, I think that you should get out of this because I think you are losing your perspective as to what's happening. And I told him that I thought that he was being manipulated, particularly after you know, all of this stuff came out. And he said, well, I've already quit university because they told me to quit university. And what am I going to do? I have no options. Everyone hates me. You know, and he told me that he felt trapped. You know, and part of the reason why I'm speaking out and part of the reason why Shamir is speaking out is you know, in large part, you know, irrespective of what you think about
Darren's political stance on things. He was a young person that was manipulated and continues to be manipulated, in my view. And what is so outrageous is that he is the one who is legally liable. He is the one being investigated. It's not Dom Cummings being investigated. It's not Stephen Parkinson being investigated. It's not Cleo Watson, also at Downing Street, being investigated. She was head of outreach. She was in charge of this program. It's not Victoria Woodcock, who went after being notified, 2 weeks after being notified that she was under investigation. She goes onto this shared drive where they were putting all of their advertising, putting all of their materials, and she goes and attempts to delete Dom Cummings, herself, and Henry DeZoot, the head of digital Vote Leave, after they were being notified that they were under investigation, right? And it's not them that's being investigated, it's Darren, the 22-year-old intern, who had no control over that spending and was just told, sign here, sign here.
Do you think these people that you've mentioned, not Darren, the other people that you've mentioned there, knew what they were doing, knew that what they were doing was in breach of the law?
So, Vote Leave's lawyers, okay, William Norton, wrote the Constitution for Believe. The entire process was managed by Vote Leave's lawyers, okay? So Believe was set up by Vote Leave's lawyers, the entire process was managed by Vote Leave's lawyers, and as Shamir has commented on before, that created a veneer or a sort of a sense that that what Believe was doing, or what these two young people were doing, felt legal because they kept talking to the lawyers who kept telling them to do this and that. So they just assumed that, well, if the Vote Leave lawyers are telling us to do this, that therefore this must be the proper way to do it. This was their first campaign, right? They were volunteers. So I don't, although Darren is technically legally liable for what happened, morally I don't fault him.
If we put Darren to one side, Dominic Cummings, all of these other people that you're talking about, do you think they knew that what was being done was not on the right side of the law?
Why did Victoria Woodcock, 2 weeks after being notified that they were under investigation, go onto a shared drive that Vote Leave set up and try to delete herself, Dom Cummings, and Henry DeZoot? Why did that happen? After being notified that they were under investigation.
I think we can speculate on that now. I mean, ultimately, this is a matter for the Electoral Commission, and if offence has been committed, then action is taken against the individuals concerned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Simon, you have one quick question on this, and then Brendan.
Almost irrelevant to what you were just saying, but let's assume for a minute that the assertions you make are absolutely right. Have you or anybody else made any assessment of actually whether any of this made much difference to the final outcome of the EU referendum?
Okay, so 2 points on that. First point is, when you're caught in the Olympics doping, right, there's not a debate about how much illegal drug you took, right? Or, well, he probably would have come in first anyway, or, he only took half of the amount, or, doesn't matter. If you're caught cheating, you lose your medal, right? Because if we allow cheating in our democratic process, then, and we allow this amount, what about next time? What about the time after that, right? This is a breach of the law, this is cheating. And it's the thing that's really important to understand here is that this is not some council race or a by-election. This is an irreversible change to the constitutional settlement of this country. So that's, first of all, that's why it matters. And if you cheat on an exam, you get a fail. If you cheat on the Olympics, you lose your medal, right? You shouldn't win by cheating. First point. Second point, to the actual substance of your question, Dom Cummings himself says that this is what won Brexit for them. He says AIQ, they could not have won without AIQ, and it speaks volumes to the fact that they spent 40% of their budget on AIQ. Having seen the effectiveness of the conversion rates on the online ads that AIQ puts out, they are incredibly effective. They are incredibly effective. When you look at online adverts, and you can get programs with a conversion rate of 1 or 2%, right? You put out a lot of adverts, and a conversion, just so that people are aware, is not just somebody seeing an ad, and not only just seeing an ad and then clicking on the ad, it's clicking on the ad and then performing an action. So that's what the definition of a conversion is. So filling out a form, giving an email.
But are you going as far as saying that had these institutions not cheated, in your words, then the outcome of the referendum might have been different. Is that what you're thinking?
I think
it is.
I think it is completely reasonable to say that there could have been a different outcome in the referendum, had there not been, in my view, cheating.
Thanks. Sorry. Thank you. I just wanted to, before bring Brendan in, just to clarify a few things we've been discussing in this section. So from what you say, you've used the term sort of franchise operation. It seems like kind of mafia style franchise operation of these different entities. We've focused on 3. There could be many more that are technically independent of each other, but totally they're totally reliant on each other as well. That their business is reliant on each other. And if there's one entity, is there one person who's responsible for that entity, do you think?
If there's one as in who's responsible for the whole sort of web of things?
If it's a franchise, then there's a kind of, ultimately there's a coordinator of that franchise. There's someone whose IP that franchise is.
Well, when I was there, that was Alexander Nix and Steve Bannon. But that's a question you should be asking AIQ.
Yeah. And just in regards to AIQ and GSR, the data from GSR, the Alexander Kogan data, do you believe that all the companies would have had access to that data that was gathered as well? That would have been accessible to AIQ, to Cambridge Analytica, to anyone that was working as part of this franchise?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's farcical to say that AIQ didn't have access to the Facebook data when they were building the software that deployed it.
Yeah.
You can't do online targeting if you don't have access to the database.
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah. Thank you, Brendan O'Hara.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. One question, looking back slightly, you talked about the AIQ conversion rates. What were those conversion rates? You said they were significant, or more than significant. What were they?
I've seen conversion rates. So obviously it depends on the program and the advert. So there's not one hard and fast rule. But I've seen conversion rates, 5-7%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in online advertising, that's a very effective program. Because again, the conversion is not just somebody seeing the ad or even clicking on it. It's them going and performing an action, signing up, donating, performing a substantive action, or coming and attending an event. So performing a substantive action, and you'll get on online ads, a lot of programs that I've seen will get conversions of 1-2%, 7. I saw one program that they had which had a 10%. I mean, that was kind of an insane, but they had substantially higher conversion rates, at least on the American projects that I worked on. I haven't seen the work, intimately that they did on Brexit, but what they told me was that they had, they focused their effort. So AIQ didn't just advertise to everybody in the country. They focused their effort on 5 to 7 million people, right? Who were sort of the core universe that if you could turn out these people, then you can win. And so what they told me is they didn't advertise to everyone in the country. They took a very specific sliver of the country that they in a very calculated way that they needed in order to win, and they just blasted them with ads. You could find out because Facebook would have that information, Google would have that information.
And you see that 5, 7, up to 10% is absolutely unprecedented in terms of.
It's very for substantive actions like giving £20, signing up and going to an event, becoming a member, whatever that substantive action is, that is a really good conversion rate for people that you've never spoken to before, right? So this is not a retargeting. I'm not talking about retargeting. I'm talking about fresh people that you've never spoken to before. But if you target it in an effective way, and if you think about it, right, if you get a 5 to 7% conversion rate, and you target several 100,000 people, and each of those people gives £10 if you count that as the substantive action, or joins and becomes a member or attends an event, that actually, when you scale it, becomes quite impactful.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you about the relationship between Cambridge Analytica and Global Science Research? What was that relationship, as you understand it? What work did they do?
GSR, that's Kogan's company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So GSR was contracted. There were several iterations of the Facebook harvesting project. It first started as a very small pilot, firstly to see, just most simply, is this data matchable to an electoral register? Because one of the concerns was if you just collect somebody named John Smith, that could be anybody, so can you actually match that to this John Smith on this street in this city? We then scaled out slightly to make sure that he could actually acquire data in the speed that he said that he could. So the first real pilot of it was a sample of 10,000 people who joined the app. That was in late May 2014. That project went really well, and that's when we signed a much larger contract with GSR in the first week of June. I can't remember the specific date, but the first week of June 2014, where the app went out and collected surveys and people joining apps throughout the summer of 2014. In terms of which then ended up leading to the 50, the 50 million number is what is what the media has felt safest to report, but my recollection, because of the documentation that they can rely on, my recollection is substantially higher than that. My own view is that it was much more than 50 million. But in terms of the relationship, there was a contractual relationship between the companies. Is that the?
It's good. I just wanted to follow on. I mean, now that we've established that there was this relationship, this contractual relationship, from Cambridge Analytica's perspective, was that a useful relationship with GSR?
Was that a use from Cambridge Analytica's perspective?
Yes.
Oh, incredibly! I mean, this is what built the company. Like this was the foundational data set that then was modeled to create the algorithms. So I mean, that was a very important relationship.
Again, the reason I asked that is because on the 27th of February, your data come from Global Science Research, to which you replied, we had a relationship with GSR. They did some research for us back in 2014. That research proved to be fruitless, so the answer is no. The chair then said, they have not supplied you with any data or information. Mr. Nix replied, no. The chair said, your data sets are not based with information you've received from them. He said, no, not at all. Does that...
$1 million contract? That's all I'd say to that. Well, why did you spend, better part of $1 million on GSR? Why is there copious amounts of email, which I've passed on to the committee, the contractual documents, the invoicing, the match rates of that data, emails about that data. That's just not true. It's just not true. Sorry, it's not true.
Been quoted as saying that Cambridge Analytica, we exploited Facebook to harvest millions of people's profiles and built models to exploit what we knew about them and target their inner demons. Could you explain just a little bit further what that means and even give a practical example of what that would have meant?
So when you're looking at psychological disposition, so no one is a perfectly rational agent, right? I mean, what in part makes us human is our irrationality, right? Otherwise we'd all be just robots. And so different people have different dispositional attributes, so different personality traits,
different degrees of mental heuristics or biases. So, for example, if you are able to create profiling algorithms that can predict certain traits, so let's say a high degree of openness and a high degree of neuroticism, and when you look at that profile, that's the profile of a person who's more prone to conspiratorial thinking, for example. They're open enough to kind of connect to things that may not really seem reasonable to your average person, and they're anxious enough or impulsive enough to start clicking and reading and looking at things. And so if you can create a psychological profile of a type of person who is more prone to adopting certain forms of ideas, conspiracies, for example, and you can identify what that person looks like in data terms, you can then go out and predict how likely somebody is going to be to adopt more conspiratorial messaging, and then advertise or target them with blogs or websites or various what everyone now calls fake news, so that they start seeing all of these ideas or all of these stories around them in their digital environment. They don't see it when they watch CNN or NBC or BBC, and they start to go, well, why is it that everyone's talking about this online? Why is it that I'm seeing everything here, but the mainstream media isn't talking about how Obama has moved a battalion into Texas because he's planning on staying for a third term? I keep seeing that everywhere, but why isn't the mainstream media talking about that? Not everyone's going to adopt that, right? So the advantage of using profiling is that you can find the specific group of people who are more prone to adopting that idea as your early adopters, as people who you can start. If you think about it in terms of trends, right? All trends start with a group of people who adopt something early. So if you can find people, if you can find those people in your data sets because you know what they look like in terms of data, you catalyze a trend over time, but you first need to find what those people look like. Does that?
Yeah, but that tactic, was that routinely used by SCL or Cambridge Analytica? Was that one of the tools in the armory that was routinely used?
Yes, that was the basis of a lot of our research was what kinds of, how far can we go with certain types of people, and who is it that we would need to target with what types of messaging.
And can I ask, in accessing that data or getting your hands on that data, or was it the other way around? Were they approached by GSR?
I've gotten this question quite a bit. It's sort of a bit of both, because we were already working with several professors at Cambridge. So first point that I would say is GSR actually became a company simply to service Cambridge Analytica, right? So GSR didn't pre-exist. Okay. We were already working with a lot of professors in various ways, just ad hoc consulting, that sort of thing, at Cambridge, which is how we got introduced to Kogan. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't as direct as like I sought out Kogan or CA sought out Kogan, and it wasn't that Kogan sought out us. It was just the fact that we were engaging a lot of the same people, and it was just through that interaction that we started talking. The first profs that we started working with were David Stilwell and Mikhail Kaczynski. But the reason why we stopped working with them was because
so Mikhail Kaczynski at the time was the deputy director of the Psychometric Center, and he said once he found out how much money we had, he asked for $500,000 and 50% royalties, which he sent in an email. So that's I also provide that to the committee. And that kind of commitment, and it was Kogan who then came and said, well, actually, I could do it just as long as you pay for the data and pay for costs, we can do it and figure out, some kind of commercial deal after. So let's just see if this works. And so that's why Kogan ultimately was selected to be the person to provide those services, because Dr. Kaczynski wanted $500,000 and 50% royalties.
Do you know how much Cambridge Analytica paid GSR for the data?
So it depends on what you mean by paid for, because the way the project ran, for the most part, was SCL, because remember, all the accounts are actually SCL. So when I say CA and SCL, I'm talking about effectively the same thing. So it was technically SCL accounts that were paying for it. SCL would pay for the invoicing to Qualtrics or MTurk. So these were survey respondent recruitment platforms. SCL would pay for that directly. So not that much money actually was passed through GSR. A lot of it was just paid directly to Qualtrics or Amazon, MTurk, etc. The contract fee, GSR was paid money, because in order to make a valid contract, you need consideration. So they did receive 3.14 pounds, or pounds, as the contract fee. So, but most of the money that was spent went directly to pay for costs rather than pay Kogan. When I was there, I don't know exactly, because I know that Kogan stayed around longer, with SCL after I left. So I'm not sure at that point if he made a commercial deal or not with SCL. But when I was there, it was predominantly just a research project. The deal was that he could keep all the data and do research or whatever he wanted to do with it. So for him, it was appealing because you had a company that the amount of money that we could spend on it, and also we didn't have to go through all the compliance stuff that you have to do with academic grants and all the reporting and all of that. So we could literally just start next week and pay for whatever you want. And so my impression at the time was that for an academic that would have been quite appealing.
Finally, much of the attention, quite rightly, is on Cambridge Analytica at the moment. Do you know other data analytics companies out there who are operating in the same way?
So when I first joined SCL, one of the very first emails that I got was asking me about a company called Palantir. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with Palantir, but it's a private contractor. Its largest client is the NSA. It also works for GCHQ. Alexander Nix was very interested in the work that Palantir did, in part because Sophie Schmidt, who is the daughter of Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google, worked for Alexander Nix before I came on board and introduced him to Palantir. So when I came on, one of the very first questions was, can we do something with Palantir? Can we do something with Palantir? What do you think about Palantir? So we actually had several meetings with Palantir whilst I was there. And some of the documentation I've also provided to the committee, and there is more documentation that I still need to provide you on this. But Palantir, there were senior Palantir employees that were also working on the Facebook data.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A quick question from Rebecca Power.
Apologies, I have to leave, but I just In relation-
Can I just was not an official contract between Palantir and Cambridge Analytica, but there were Palantir staff who would come into the office and work on the data. And we would go and meet with Palantir staff at Palantir. So just to clarify, Palantir didn't officially contract with Cambridge Analytica, but there were Palantir staff who helped build the models that we were working on.
Thank you. Rebecca.
It was something you mentioned earlier, Christopher, and I wondered if it's related to some of the things my colleagues just referred to. You mentioned that in the elections around the world that these various companies, AIQ in particular, had been involved with, one of the main influences and the main way they made money through influence brokering. I wonder if you could explain what that is. And I'm asking, is there a more sinister side to this? This isn't just about influence and affecting elections and the kick of the academic side. Is there a more sinister money-making side linked to all of this that we haven't yet uncovered?
Yes. So you don't actually make a ton of money working on politics, particularly in a small island nation, for example, right? But that island nation may have oil reserves, or it may have minerals, or lax labor laws that can be exploited by companies, or could have lax labor laws if those laws were passed. So part of the business model of SCL is to capture a government, so win an election. You get paid for that, but you don't make a ton of money. Where you actually make money is then going to the minister and introducing the minister to a company, and then making deals. I remember deals about there were different companies that were interested in building new ports or things like that, and in order to get a competitive advantage, if some money goes here, some money goes here, and then you can introduce the minister, and if the minister then approves the project, then you get a cut of that deal. The company also, so even, for example, when I was there, it wasn't just selling influence from a company to a government. Often they would use fake government projects to also then help support the political aims of the minister. So for example, Alexander Nix met with the Minister of Health of Ghana and offered her essentially to provide her with a large degree of political and campaign services, but they would bill it through the Ministry of Health as a health research program. And so they approved that. I've also sent documentation to the committee on this.
So can I just stop you? Earlier you referred to some of these very wealthy people involved in these companies. Do you think this is really what their driving force is, that they can be big power players on the world stage?
Yeah, you can be like, a colonial master in a country. Sorry, not to sound flippant about it, but it felt very much like a privatized colonizing operation. You would go into a country that has underdeveloped civic institutions, you would exploit that, and then make money off of it. And that's how they make a lot of their money, is through exploiting relationships and the fact that there's not a lot of oversight and government accountability in a lot of these countries. So it's very easy to make money off of that. The key thing is you have to have your guy in power first.
Thank you. Charles Watling.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You've told some pretty horrendous stories, particularly about the political situation in Nigeria, working on that Cambridge Analytica doesn't have staff, yet you work for Cambridge Analytica. Were you employed by SCL?
I was paid for by SCL. So yes, I worked for Cambridge Analytica, as does everybody. Everybody works for Cambridge Analytica, but they're paid for by SCL.
Right, and you said...
And when I started before Cambridge Analytica even existed.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, and Cambridge Analytica came along, and that relationship which you've so eloquently described started, and so in effect you were working for Cambridge Analytica. Yeah. Now, you talked about all those malevolent influences that have been exposed in Nigeria, etc. And you're working for these people. And you signed, as you said, a non-disclosure agreement with Cambridge Analytica. Is that right?
With SCL.
With SCL. And can I ask you, now you've decided to go whistleblower on all this. Are you under any threats? Is anything happening? What's happening in your world?
Do you know what's interesting? The most amount of legal pushback that I've got actually wasn't from Cambridge Analytica, it was from Facebook.
Right.
It's Facebook who's most upset about this story.
And how does that materialize? How does they threatening legal action or?
I mean, threatening, they sent some fairly intimidating legal correspondence. They haven't actually taken action on that. I'm not sure exactly what they're planning. They just have gone silent. They won't talk to me anymore.
So you're just out in the cold now.
Sorry?
You're just left out in the cold now.
Yeah. But I do anticipate at some point, some robust pushback from Cambridge Analytica, because this is sort of an existential crisis for them. But I think that I have a fairly robust public interest defense to breaking that NDA and that undertaking of confidentiality.
And you say that the Donald Trump thing wasn't the actual crossing of the line, but it was, if you like, the final straw in the camel's back when.
As in, it was no longer this niche, shady firm. It was a firm that, was making a massive impact on the world. So it made it much more salient in my mind.
So your move was dictated by morality?
There's no sudden. It's a process of coming to terms with what you've created and the impact that has had. I am incredibly remorseful for my role in setting it up, and I'm the first person to say that I should have known better. But what's done is done.
But it wasn't a road to Damascus thing. It was a gradual realization that what I'm doing here is amoral. Is that how you felt?
Yeah. There was no sort of, there wasn't a sudden aha moment. When I left, I knew that I was growing really uncomfortable with working at the firm for a whole slew of reasons. But I didn't report the firm because they kept threatening to sue me, and I had signed not just an NDA, but then this additional undertaking of confidence. And it's very intimidating to go up against, an American billionaire who's threatening to, sue you into oblivion. And that's why, the thing. So when you look at, for example, Carol's reporting in The Guardian, right? So there's been a lot of attention on me because I've become the face of it, because I'm the one that's come forward and put my name to it. But she has like 12, 15 other sources that she's talked to.
Sure.
And even now, right? Even now, with CA being exposed, and the future of the company sort of now kind of is in question as to whether it'll still be a company in a couple months. Even now, people don't want to come forward because that's how intimidating Alexander Nix is, that's how intimidating Steve Bannon is, that's how intimidating Robert Mercer is.
Mm-hmm. So you find yourself in the vanguard of it, but I mean, I put it to you, is there a part of you want to bring these companies down? Is that how you feel about it? You're angry, I've seen your emotion.
Nothing good has come from Cambridge Analytica, right? It's not a legitimate business. SCL is not a legitimate business. And
you know, so yes, I don't think that they should, you know, remain in business.
So that sort of clears up your motivation. Can I move on to Cambridge Analytica? I mean, do you know when Facebook first knew that its data had been passed to Cambridge Analytica? Do you have any idea when that happened?
So it's sort of, I know it sounds like a simple question, but it's actually a hard one to answer because I've heard different things from different people, and all of them are plausible. I remember when, and I think this was in around July of 2014, Kogan was delayed for a couple days because Facebook had throttled the app so that it couldn't pull as much data, or there was some problem with like pulling as much data at the same speed as before.
Yep.
And so he told me that he had a conversation with some engineers at Facebook. Okay, this is what, so I wasn't in those conversations, this is what he told me at the time. So Facebook would have known from that moment about the project because he had a conversation with Facebook's engineers, or at least that's what he told me. I don't know if that's entirely true or not, but that's what he told me. Facebook's account of it is that they had no idea until The Guardian first reported it at the end of 2015, and then they decided to send out letters. They sent letters to me in August 2016 asking, you know, do you know where this data might be, or was it deleted? It's interesting that Facebook, when the date of the letter is the same month that Cambridge Analytica officially joined the Trump campaign. So I'm not sure if Facebook was genuinely concerned about the data or just the optics of, you know, okay, now this firm it's not just some random firm in Britain, it's now working for a presidential campaign.
You said an interesting thing there. You said where this data might be. I mean, data isn't stuff that you sort of pick up and move. It spreads, but it remains in its source position.
Yeah, it's completely fungible.
Yeah.
Right? It can go anywhere, and
so it's how far it's spread.
It's often impossible to actually ascertain, like, where did data go, or where is it, or how much of it is.
And do you know if Facebook ever made any efforts to retrieve data, to delete data?
No, they didn't. That's my knowledge. Certainly didn't with me, until after I went public, and then, you know, they made me suspect number one, despite the fact that the ICO wrote, you know, to me and to Facebook saying that no, I've actually given over everything to the authorities. So they you know, I suspect that when Facebook looked at what happened in 2016, they looked at it and went, well, if we make a big deal of this, this might be optically not the best thing to, you know, make a big fuss about.
It's a PR thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you saw what happened last week, you know, it was a big deal. So I don't think they pushed it, in part because if you want to, you know, that's going to get out, and that might cause problems. So they kind of, my impression is they've sort of wanted to push it under the rug.
So to put it in a nutshell, it wasn't in Facebook's interest to pursue the large data breach.
No, because also when you look at like when you look at what this firm was also doing, right? You know, you had the professor Kogan who was managing working on Russian-funded projects, which, by the way, CA pitched to other clients. So, you know, they knew what he was doing in Russia.
But was that you pitching? Or?
No, it wasn't me pitching it. So I've sent you copies of emails where other people at the company are deciding to put it into a pitch for other clients, and the fact that, you know, you had all kinds of people having access to the data. You know, staff at Palantir having access to the data, right? All kinds of people had access to the data.
So it
everywhere, yeah.
If I may add something, so Harry Davis, the journalist at The Guardian, who published an article in December 2015, that's the moment where the story became a public story, or started becoming a public story. That's also my entry point into this.
Right.
But he has just published an article in The Guardian yesterday or the day before, explaining the genesis of that article for him. So apparently he knew of improprieties around data flows outside of Facebook already a few months after it happened. So something like, I'm guessing, around October 2014, let's say. And he started investigating, but he didn't know where the data was going. He didn't know what use was, and so on. It's only later, because he got a tip that that Cruz was working with Cambridge Analytica, that he connected the dots and later published his article in December 2015, so much later. But my point is that at the time, you would have to ask with him, but somewhere between October 2014, a few months later maybe, he started talking to Facebook and asking Facebook questions about this data. And at that time, essentially, Facebook was the only entity that could really trace the data because of contractual.
And as far as you're aware, they made no effort to do so.
You would have to ask him. But that's much earlier than I thought for a long time. It's only a couple of days ago that I changed my mind on this question.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so I can be clear on this use of the data that came from Alexander Kogan. From what you said, Chris Wiley, the data was used to build the algorithms that ran Cambridge Analytica. So the core data itself, once you've used it, once you've extracted the value you need from it, you've got your own systems then. So Cambridge Analytica say, well, when we were asked by Facebook to give that data back, we did. But even if they did do that, they've already used the data to build other systems.
You've created what's called a derivative product.
Yeah.
So let's say you have a book and it's written in French, and then you translate it into English, right? It's the same information being conveyed, it just looks very different, or it could be even look completely different. It could be translated into, Chinese, for example. Looks completely different semantic structure, grammatical structure, tenses, etc. But the same information is conveyed. So just because the data itself may look different, the underlying information is what matters.
Yeah. So in this case, even if Cambridge Analytica are correct, and what they're saying in response to what you said today is that, well, we gave this data back, they may well have done, but the value extracted from the data.
Because the data is like whether it is, expressed in English or French, right? But the information is what it is that it's actually trying to what is conveyed.
Yeah. And have you been able to benefit from that data set in other projects you've done outside of Cambridge Analytica, or does that data?
Sorry, as in, did I personally benefit from the data?
Well, no, so you were working on that data at the time when you were there.
Yeah.
And whatever was done with that. When you left Cambridge Analytica, were you able to benefit from the acquisition of that data? Tools that developed in that company?
I haven't, I didn't do any contracts or any, work with that data.
After you left it?
No, I haven't worked with any clients that data was used for.
Yeah.
And as I recall, that data got deleted, I believe, in 2015 on my end.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Can I bring you in?
Going back to 2013, when you said you started out and you were introduced by a mutual political contact to SCL Group, I was interested in the initial article that Carol wrote in The Observer on the 18th of March. You said, I wanted to know why the Lib Dems sucked at winning elections, and that's how you kind of got into it and started looking at the issue. The introduction through a mutual friend in June 2013 to SCL Group, was that a Lib Dem politician?
It wasn't a politician, no.
No. Okay. You don't want to say to the committee who the contact was? The introductory contact?
I don't think it's relevant, and I'm trying to, anytime I bring up somebody's name, then the whole world sort of comes down on them, and there's conspiracies about all kinds of people. So I don't think it's fair on that person, because it was genuinely just an innocent introduction.
Okay, fine. And then I want to go back to what you were saying about the Vote Leave campaign and AIQ.
Right.
So we know, because it's in the public domain, that Vote Leave spent 40% of its declared spend through AIQ or on AIQ.
Yeah.
Yeah. £2.7 million. And in your evidence, you said that, and I just wanted to clarify this, whether you were talking about the referendum campaign or a different campaign, 5 to 7 million people were targeted by AIQ.
Yeah, that's what they told
this
me.
Sliver of
like that it was that it might have been. You have different targeting universes, so that's probably to just clarify that slightly. They probably had a wider peripheral universe and a core universe, and you often have a universe, most fundamentally a persuasion universe, and then a turnout universe. Mm-hmm. So, but my understanding from those conversations was that they were targeting a very specific cohort of people. That they posited that if X percent of these people turn out, then you can win.
Yeah. Okay. And you also said that the conversion rate for AIQ was around 5 to 7%.
For some projects.
Projects.
Every project will have different conversion rates. There's some candidates that are just not sellable, right? There's some, there's some, right? It's not magic,
yeah.
Right? So if your candidate makes a habit of eating puppies in some sort of sadomasochist ritual, it's hard to sell that, even with really good targeting.
Yet, okay, so I'm just trying to work through in my mind. So we've got the targeted group of people, we've got a conversion rate, which you say for AIQ they did quite well.
Yeah, and also just remember that a conversion rate doesn't necessarily mean turnout. That's like people who are performing a substantive action for your campaign itself.
Yeah. And we know that the Vote Leave adverts, online adverts, received nearly 1 billion impressions because Dominic Cummings has told us that in his blog. Yeah.
So that's how many people. That's how many views.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And in the end, the referendum result. Specific events and decisions made all the difference, unquote. So going back to what you said about, I think in response to my colleague Simon Hart, about this spend and this targeting and the outcome of the referendum, you think that it's perfectly reasonable to say it could have made a difference, or did make a difference?
I think it's incredibly reasonable to say that AIQ played a very significant role in Leave winning. Yeah.
So that's the Vote Leave expenditure. What about Leave.eu? This is Nigel Farage and Aaron Banks' campaign group. Did Cambridge Analytica work with them?
So just to be clear, I didn't work at CA when that happened, but I have seen documents. I think some of the documents may have been passed to the committee. There's also tapes, recordings of Andy Wigmore, for example, talking about how they used Cambridge Analytica. Gary Gunster is also on tape saying that they, played a role early on in the campaign. One of the things that you have to remember about CA is that they're very good at using these weasel words. So I've also seen invoices that said UKIP on them, right? So not necessarily Leave EU, but I've seen invoices that said UKIP. So they might go, oh, we started working for Leave EU and then we didn't, and all of that's, that's just, we were over exaggerating or whatever, but then they may have also been working for other entities also. One of the other things that I've seen, which I believe Emma Bryant, the academic
may have passed on is documents from Eldon Insurance, which is Andy Wigmore's insurance company. They're Eldon Insurance documents, so they say Eldon Insurance on the letterhead, or if they're sort of a presentation, so it says Eldon at the top. But then it's all about the response rates that LeaveEU messaging was getting online. So I think one of the other questions that you should be asking to Eldon Insurance is, did you use your insurance data or your customer data to the benefit of LeaveEU? And following that, was that data processed, or did Cambridge Analytica also have access to that data? Because what we do know is that Cambridge Analytica absolutely had a relationship with LeaveEU. Some of the things that I've seen, which I believe have been passed on to the committee, although you would have to check with Emma about that, are documents that also have Eldon Insurance, which would have a huge amount of data because it's an insurance company, talking about the performance rates and conversion rates of LeaveEU advertising. So I'm not sure. I'm much less familiar with what happened there than I am with Vote Leave. But some questions I'd encourage you to ask are, why is it that Eldon Insurance knew and was reporting on the conversion rates and response rates of LeaveEU messaging? Did Eldon Insurance use customer data in any way for LeaveEU? Did Cambridge Analytica have access to that data?
And as well as the Eldon Insurance documents, are there any other documents or evidence that you've seen that links Leave.eu to Cambridge Analytica activity during the referendum campaign?
From someone else, I've seen, again, UKIP invoices. I also know that, Bannon was really interested generally in UKIP. He saw it as really important for America because, if you're fighting a culture war, Britain plays a key role in that, because if you look at the way sort of Americans imagine British people as, Britain is still like Downton Abbey, for lack of, everyone's sort of very, posh, educated, refined, and if you can instill a populist movement in Britain, in the American psyche, it's validating. If Britain is doing it, if Britain is Brexiting, then we can elect Trump. So very early on, and so for example, Matthew Richardson, who I believe is on the board of UKIP, if I'm correct, or don't quote me on that. He's involved in UKIP, but he's also Robert Mercer's lawyer. So there are significant links, but I would ask Andy Wigmore. What did you meet? Did you meet with Robert Mercer? Did you meet with Steve Bannon?
Okay, thank you. And you've also said this morning that you believe that there was unlawful activity during the referendum by Vote Leave. Again, when asked by my colleague. Slowly, I think.
They just a point on it, because I've provided them with as much information as I can, but the ICO doesn't have a lot of powers.
No.
And also the other thing is they don't have that many people, and so one of the things that I've witnessed is how much money and people can be spent on at Cambridge Analytica or at Facebook. And then looking at the small team that the ICO has, and the very limited resources that the ICO has, and the very limited powers that the ICO has. So it's not, in my view, it's not the ICO's fault that it's being slow.
I wasn't phrasing that question as a criticism at all, and I'm glad you've said what you've said, because what I was going to go on to
it's been very difficult for them. Because they struggle to get evidence, and they struggle to deal with, then when giving them the evidence. They don't have that many resources.
No, sure. I mean, if you think about what they're there to enforce compared to, say, a police force somewhere in the UK, their funding is tiny and their resources are tiny. And essentially, with the referendum, if somebody breaks the law, if the allegations that we've heard about are proven, then it's £20,000 to fix a referendum. And so that's not a disincentive to behave unlawfully. Would you agree
and also,
with that?
by the time, because these investigations take so long, even if it's found out, Brexit will already have happened.
Brexit's happened. The companies that ran the campaigns have been dissolved.
Yeah.
People have disappeared.
Cheating in the referendum, and Brexit has already happened, and we can't go back.
Absolutely.
And that's why some of these regulators, in my view, really do need to be properly resourced. The Commission also.
Sure. Can I turn to something completely different now? You've talked about different countries where AIQ have played a part. And I wanted to ask you about the Czech Republic. The Channel 4 investigation, the undercover investigation, executives on screen said that Cambridge Analytica and SCL had worked in more than 200 elections across the world, including in the Czech Republic. And I'm quoting from Mark Turnbull, a man with a plaster on his nose. We've just used a different organisation to run a very, very successful project in an Eastern European country where no one even knew they were there. Did you know anything about the work in the Czech Republic?
I've heard about the work in the Czech Republic, but I don't have any direct experience on it. But this is sort of what I'm saying about the role of AIQ and other companies like it, is that if you want a company to fly under the radar or not be noticed until after an election, after you've gotten out of the country, it's very beneficial to have this web of companies that are registered in different countries, that have seemingly independent operations that you can then use to operate under the radar.
Yeah. And you also mentioned in your evidence about Russian companies working with, I think, Alexander Nix. And I know that in the evidence that you've made public, you talked about Alexander Nix doing a presentation to Lukoil.
Lukoil. I've passed this on to the committee.
You said it doesn't make any sense to me. If this was a presentation about a commercial deal, why were they so interested? Why were Lukoil so interested in our political targeting? And obviously there's a connection between Lukoil and the Czech Republic, because one of the former Lukoil executives advises the new president of the Czech Republic. So what data did the companies that were pitched in Russia, did the companies that were pitched in Russia have access to data? What were they able to see and get hold of?
What I am a direct witness to is meetings, presentations, discussions, and conference calls with Lukoil. So I can't say one way or the other did data end up going to Lukoil. But the conversations with Lukoil surrounded two things. Firstly, Alexander sent them white papers that I had written, or sort of project write-ups that I had written about the Ripon project. So what kind of data were we collecting? What was our internal capacity like? How effective was it? And so a paper that just explains, we're profiling the American electorate. We can target them online. This is how we influence them. And then secondly, presentations from Alexander Nix, which I've also provided to the committee, which the very first slide is rumor campaigns in Nigeria, disinformation in Nigeria, attitudinal inoculation in Nigeria, undermining confidence in civic institutions in Nigeria. And those were the first couple slides that he gave to Lukoil, this Russian oil company. And the thing that I found bizarre at the time, and my feelings at the time weren't necessarily, it wasn't it wasn't. It was sort of suspicion, but not in a concerning way. Just in sort of like, what are you doing, Alexander? Because just something something naughty, not nefarious, if that makes sense. Because to me it didn't make sense, and he would refuse to tell me what this actual project was, because it didn't make sense to me. This Russian oil company wants to know about all of this data that we're collecting, despite the fact that we don't operate anywhere where it has an interest. Like, it doesn't. It's a Russian oil company. Why do you need a massive profiling project in America? That didn't make sense to me. And then also, what didn't make sense to me was why Alexander made such a concerted effort to show this company, its experience with disinformation and rumor campaigns. So I just didn't have. At the time, I just thought, okay, well, there's something else up here, but I didn't think it was some kind of grand conspiracy or anything. I just thought, oh, it's just maybe Alexander is doing some deal or cutting some deal or some money thing or whatever. But it was when, in the 2016 cycle, when, this narrative about and evidence about Russian interference, particularly using Facebook as a means as a vehicle for propaganda, where I started to think, right, well, we were talking to a company that works hand in hand with the FSB. Alexander put in an email that he was sending my white paper and documents to the CEO of the company. So it's not some random person at the company, to the person at the very top of this company. And that we also made it known that the lead professor who had access to the harvesting applications was going back and forth to Russia and working on the project partly out of Russia, and also working on other psychological profiling projects in Russia. And so for me, that was concerning. What I'm not saying, I'll be super clear, I'm not saying that Alexander Nix or Alexander Kogan or anybody involved in that knowingly colluded with Russia to undermine an American election. What I'm saying is that there was a very significant risk that was created in notifying this company, not only of the existence of this data, but the fact that in telling them that the person in charge of this data is actually operating in part out of Russia would make it incredibly easy for them to get access to that data. And for me, that's concerning, and I think that should be looked into. It's not that there was, I'm not saying that there was, that I think, and my own view is I think that Alexander was being really stupid. They should have known better, because you have to remember SCL Group, runs projects in the Baltics and Eastern Europe for various NATO countries on counter-propaganda, counter-Russian propaganda, and they also work on the NATO Stratcom training center in Latvia. So Alexander would have known that, given how closely we work on the border of Russia on projects that were funded by NATO members, in large part for counter-propaganda effort, that and the Stratcom Center and all that kind of work in Latvia, that the company would have logically been an intelligence target for Russia. So if you're meeting with Lukoil, which very openly has a relationship with the FSB and operates in Europe where the FSB can't, and you are likely already an intelligence target because of the military and defense project work that you're doing in Eastern Europe and the Baltics, and then you tell them that, hey, by the way, you don't even need to hack into our data systems. Just put a keylogger on Kogan's computer in Russia and you've got everything. It's as simple as that.
Okay. You mentioned a professor in relation to that evidence you just gave. Who was the professor?
Kogan.
Kogan. That was Kogan.
Kogan.
Right, fine.
But
okay.
but also when you look at Kaczynski, although Kaczynski didn't work on this project, Kaczynski was also going to Russia.
Right. Yeah.
He posted that he was going to do a presentation to the Russian Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And my very last point is just to go back to that Eldon Insurance issue that we discussed. Substantial numbers of personal injury cases.
Yeah.
And the data that they hold would be classed as sensitive data under
Absolutely.
UK law. So are you saying that you think that there would have been a breach of that sensitive data in the relationship between Cambridge Analytica and Eldon Insurance?
So I'll be super clear. I don't know one way or the other what the relationship between Eldon Insurance and Cambridge Analytica is, but what I have seen, and I think has been passed to the committee,
is the UKIP, Eldon Insurance.
Is Eldon Insurance branded documents talking about the response rates and performance figures of Leave EU messaging and online advertising. So the thing that I find bizarre about that is first of all, why is Eldon Insurance making this report? And secondly, why do they have access to that data? Has had a relationship with Leave EU. I mean, they dispute the details, but what isn't in dispute is that they had a relationship with Leave EU. That, it's something that, so I'm not saying one way or the other that Cambridge Analytica had access to that data or that, anything like that, but it is something that is worth asking, Eldon about and Cambridge Analytica about. But or Andy Wigmore, like why was your insurance company making performance reports on Leave EU messaging? Mm-hmm. That wasn't declared.
No.
First of all, and second of all, were you using your insurance company's data to target people in Brexit? I think that's a fair question to ask.
So do I. Fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Wiley.
Thank you. Just while we were on Russia. Well, did Cambridge Analytica or SEL use any Yandex tools or Yandex cookies as part of their analytics work?
I'm not sure, so I can't say one way or the other.
Okay. I know, and this was a blog report saying that I think Yandex verification meta tag was found on the Breitbart website.
Right.
I just wondered whether, given that, whether that was something you come across.
I know that CA has had a fairly close relationship with Breitbart, and I believe Breitbart was a client of theirs. I don't know if it's a current client, but I believe it was a client. But to the specifics of that, I don't have an answer for you.
Sure, thank you. I think Paul has a quick question.
Yes, just covering the foreign countries. You mentioned Nigeria. Can you just say a few words about what work you are aware that the company did in Trinidad and Tobago?
Sure. So the Trinidadian project was for several politicians, actually as a precursor to the Ripon project to see how much data could be pulled and could we profile different attributes in people.
Pulling it from where?
Online data sources.
Right.
So the contractual documents with AIQ's role was to go and find data. So the contracting is pulling ISP data, and there's also emails that I've passed on to the committee where Aggregate IQ is working with SCL to find a way to pull and then de-anonymize ISP data. So like raw browsing data. So the one of the other things that was pitched to the Minister of National Security there was related to some of Kogan's Russian research, which I've also provided emails on, about whether you could create a dispositional profile and then
quantify that in data of people who are more likely to commit crime. But I didn't continue working on that project because I got switched over mostly to the United States. But I've provided documentation on Trinidad to the committee, in particular with reference to aggregate IQ, trying to acquire raw, de-anonymized ISP data.
Okay, you've mentioned Latvia. I mean, I defy anyone to go to Riga and visit the National Museum of Liberation and come out in tears and a broken heart about what that country, like other Baltic republics, have been through.
Yeah.
And particularly with the legacy of the breakup of the Soviet Union, that country, like the other Baltic countries, does not need any more tensions inflamed. So could you just explain political work was done in Latvia?
Yeah, so just to be clear, that's not Cambridge Analytica, that's SCL, I believe it was SCL Defense, or some iteration of SCL.
So it's not political work?
It's not political work. I know that, I believe Canada is the main funder of that, or I think the Department of Defense in
This
Canada.
is the military side, so
it's focused on information operations training and capacity building.
Okay.
But also, my understanding was that they were doing counter-propaganda work in the Baltics. So, not, at least from my impression of it, nothing nefarious.
Okay, so there should be no suggestion that, as far as you're aware, they've piggybacked on the back of that to do political work.
Oh well, not necessarily, because I know that I believe in Lithuania they used some of their connections to do some political work in Lithuania, I believe, but my recollection on that is fuzzy. Okay. But I believe they have done some political work in addition.
I've just got one final sort of.
No, I'm sorry. They have done, I believe, political work in Latvia. I think I remember, I think I passed you a document that does reference that.
Okay, well perhaps Latvian journalists can follow that up with their government. Can I just ask one more question? Just going back to Facebook's biggest user markets. If you make a speciality out of using Facebook and surveys, and I don't know how many Alexander Kogans there are who've worked with Cambridge Analytica, you focus on the world's biggest democracy with lots and lots of elections all the time, India, as being a prime source of business, wouldn't you? And you mentioned that they'd done quite a bit of work in India. Could you just describe what you're aware of?
I believe their client was Congress, but I know that they've done all kinds of projects, both regional. I don't think they've done I don't remember a national project, but I know regionally. I mean, India's
different states.
Yeah, I mean, India is so big that one state can be as big as Britain. But they do have offices there. They do have staff there. I believe I have some documentation on India, which I can also provide to the committee if that's something of interest.
Very welcome.
Yeah, great.
Another country that doesn't need any tensions in being inflamed.
Yeah.
Yes.
My understanding, relating back to the Romanian stories that are starting to come out, and the one in India of his involvement when he died later in Kenya. So he was working for Congress, apparently, according to reports from India, but apparently he was really paid for by an Indian billionaire who actually wanted Congress to lose. So he was pretending to work for one party, but actually really paid underhand by someone else. That seems to be the reports that are coming out now from India. So definitely on all this, there needs to be some collaboration between Romanian, Kenyan, and Indian journalists to piece out what happened.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Simon Hart.
Thank you. Very conscious that you've covered a huge amount of ground in the last few hours. So I'm recap, just make sure that I've understood you correctly, particularly around the area of the EU referendum. I think I'm right in saying that you have argued this morning and submitted by way of written evidence that you are convinced that AIQ played a significant role not only with Vote Leave but also other protagonists of the Leave campaign. And I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, and that those groups were somehow loosely or informally linked with one another. Would that be a sort of correct analysis of what you've said so far?
Yeah, so what I've submitted to the Electoral Commission is evidence that shows that there was a clear reporting structure. Leave was based inside of Vote Leave's headquarters, right? So, and they reported to, Vote Leave staff. Right. And so that's included in the evidence. So yes, not just a loose or informal relationship, it was actually quite a formal. It was not formal in terms of documentation, in terms of this is the reporting structure of Leave, but the fact that they asked permission and were working out of Vote Leave's offices leads me to conclude that there was coordination that wasn't declared.
You went on to say that Facebook became aware that data may have been being used by electoral purposes. Mm-hmm. Would it necessarily therefore be the case that Facebook knew that AIQ may have also been benefiting from that same data, or would that be stretching the connections a bit too far?
I don't know. You'd have to ask Facebook that. I don't know exactly what Facebook has done and hasn't done in terms of their investigation.
But I think you said that where we know they were, that there was a data breach involving Cambridge Analytica, which has led, arguably to us having this conversation today. I'm just asking you really whether you felt that Facebook was aware of that close connection between Cambridge Analytica and AIG, or whether that is purely coincidental.
I don't know if Facebook is aware of the relationships between AIQ and Cambridge Analytica. Again, part of the intent of having a lot of companies around the world with different names is that it does make it kind of confusing and opaque as to who does what. It may also be that when Facebook went and asked questions to CA, that they just simply weren't told like a lot of the software development that actually happens at AIQ, not here. Well, it was just entirely possible. So
we have a further opportunity to question Facebook, so we'll obviously be doing that. The third point is, right at the beginning of your evidence, you suggested that, made it perfectly clear that you felt that CA and SCL, and I would add, and ask you the question whether that includes AIG, were involved in straightforward illegal activity, which you have submitted by way of evidence to the Electoral Commission. Would it be right to include AIQ in that?
Absolutely pivotal role in the overspending scheme that was set up at Vote Leave.
So does that not make the role of Mr. Mercer you described as quite intimidating, some of the doubly serious? So you've got what you're submitting is substantial players, and coupled with that, intimidation by the guy whose name appears on this complicated graph in various significant places. Mm-hmm. Do you therefore think that Mr. Mercer should be subject to investigation himself?
Absolutely.
With regard to intimidation.
And it's not just legal intimidation, right? This company uses firms like Black Cube. And I'd encourage you to talk to Channel 4 to actually watch the footage of Alexander Nix talking about Black Cube, because they weren't unfortunately able to air it. But but that's an intimidating firm. If you work with Black Cube, that's an intimidating firm.
Right. Well, and my final question which was around Alexander Nix's undercover, the film of the undercover film taken of him, in which he was referring to the various different means that coercion may take place, and including Ukrainian sex workers and all those things, subsequently denied. Do you significance should we attach as a committee to the denial?
To the denial?
His denial that they were quite happy to use coercion in attempting.
That was like common practice. There's a bunch of projects that they've worked on. You know, you look at it's not just Nigeria. Like, you know, as Carol in the Guardian has also reported, you know, St. Kitts. There was a hacking scheme in St. Kitts, for example, right? This is someone else that you should be calling to committee is Brittany Kaiser, because she played a pivotal role in that relationship between Cambridge Analytica and Black Hue. She's touched on it in one of her interviews with The Guardian, but I'd encourage you to talk to her about some of that work also. Something to say about the Nigeria project is people, you know, I got incredibly panicked phone calls from people. They had to, because the relationship with one of the funders turned sour. They were threatened. Several people were threatened with their lives, and they had to like immediately leave the country. You know, the kind. You know, my predecessor was found dead. One of my other co-workers had a massive head injury and is missing part of his skull. You know, people do get hurt at this firm, and given that they work with, you know, Israeli private intelligence firms who are willing to do essentially whatever it is that you want them to do if you pay them. This is why so many people that, for example, Carol's talked to are genuinely afraid to come forward to talk about the firm because it's that intimidating.
Thank you very much. I've sadly got to go now, so it's not a reflection of the evidence.
What is it? I mean, given what you said about Brittany Kaiser, what does it say that she was the Cambridge Analytica liaison with Leave.eu?
Yeah, so you have Brittany Kaiser, who sat at the launch event of Leave.eu, who worked on a project that involved hacking the now president of Nigeria, creating compromat, distributing videos of people being murdered, you know, I think it would be a fair thing for your committee to do, to actually, you know, call her and ask, you know, what were you doing in Nigeria, and who were you working for, and why is it that you engaged the use of hackers to hack, you know, the now president of Nigeria? You know, it's something that I know that Carol will be reporting on shortly, is that some of these people who worked on this project, you know, also work in the British government now, and that causes me grave concern as to, you know, the relationship between this country and Nigeria. I mean, you know, and I've notified the authorities about this, and unfortunately, because the ICO and also the police, in fairness, because they have such constraints on the resources, haven't been able to fully investigate it. And so I would strongly encourage you to you know, ask Brittany Kaiser about that program, because you have somebody who worked on Leave.eu who worked on this Nigeria project. You've got AIQ who worked on this Nigeria project. I mean, this just shows what these people and these companies are willing to do in order to win. You know, and they all played an absolutely pivotal role in Brexit. You know, I think that's really important for people to understand.
I know that Chris Matheson area. Brendan, if you don't mind, do you want to predict Chris first, and then we'll come on to you. I think you were looking to come in around question 25, I believe, which is looking on UK government work.
on on the work done on behalf of the UK government.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, as far as you know, is the work that Cambridge Analytica is currently undertaking on behalf of the UK government?
I don't know if Cambridge Analytica itself,
or one of the associated companies.
I know that SCL Group or SCL Defense has done work for the Ministry of Defense, also for, I believe, Distal, which is I can't remember it's like the Defense Research Agency for the UK.
Yeah. The UK version of DARPA.
Yeah, and the work that they've done for the UK government is centered around research on mostly in Middle Eastern countries to understand attitudes and behaviors of groups that could pose a risk to British society.
Is any data being collected on British citizens?
Well, the company has data on British citizens, but it's not necessarily that the Ministry of Defense is paying for data on UK citizens. Sorry, what?
Well, in terms of the work